Tonight, why the terror warning level was raised and what Al-Qaeda may be planning. We'll show you how tighter security nationwide may affect you this holiday season, especially if you're traveling. A powerful and deadly earthquake rocks a wide area of California. We'll have the latest on the casualties and destruction. And we go beyond the hype about Viagra to see if this wonder drug is really as wonderful as men are led to believe.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
And good evening. Dan is off tonight. I'm John Roberts. America begins this holiday week on high alert for a possible terror attack. Law enforcement all across the country moved into action after President Bush raised the national terror alert level from yellow or elevated to orange, meaning high. He did so after intelligence picked up some very ominous communications. CBS's Jim Stewart reports what the terrorists are saying that has U.S. officials so concerned.
The most significant information appears to be coming from British intelligence and suggests that foreign commercial flights bound for the U.S. could be used to attack targets once inside American airspace. The tone of intercepted Al-Qaeda messages, said one official, was that something spectacular will happen in the U.S. before the end of the year. Specifically mentioned as targets were New York, Washington, and Los Angeles, as well as large public celebrations, suggesting to some government analysts events like parades and football games. Another official said the intelligence suggested that senior Al-Qaeda leaders, perhaps even Osama bin Laden himself, had signed off on the attack. Taken all together, U.S. officials said the indicators warranted calling them the most significant threats monitored since 9/11. But President Bush insisted it was still safe to travel over the holidays.
American citizens need to go about their lives, but as they do so, they need to know that governments at all levels are working as hard as we possibly can to protect the American citizens.
Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge, along with FBI Director Robert Mueller and CIA officials, were scheduled to meet Monday to go over the latest threat warnings. But by Saturday morning, CIA analysts had pieced together all the overseas findings, and officials began a series of hurried conference calls to discuss them. And while much of the latest threat data still points to U.S. interest targets overseas, analysts agree that it's here that Al-Qaeda most wants to hit.
The group is committed to attacking America on its own soil. That's the big prize. That's what they want to achieve.
Officials acknowledge they're worried that by raising the code to orange too often they will wear out its effectiveness, but insist that this time it was worthwhile and that they'll probably keep it in effect into the new year. John.
Jim Stewart reporting live for us tonight from Washington. Jim, thanks. The president says, go about your life. Everything possible is being done to protect you. So CBS's Jim Axelrod looks tonight at what is being done and how life is going on in a holiday season filled with red and green and now orange.
In New York City, where it's never been anything but orange since the color code was started, they've been behaving like, well, New Yorkers.
There's not much we can do about it, but it doesn't mean that we have to live in fear.
Aware that the threat status has been elevated.
Just think back of what happened and
right.
You think like, well, could that happen again?
But not about to let that interfere with important business. Did you think at all about the raising of the terror alert before you came into the city?
Yes, we did.
Fathers and sons like John Graney and his 7-year-old Logan.
No, you can't allow your fear to take over.
And keep in mind, Manhattan may be the worst place to gauge any national sense of alarm. Because of September 11th, terror alerts simply create a different state of mind here. So if people don't seem to be too worked up in New York, imagine the level of indifference elsewhere.
Isn't it something like there's high security or something? I have no idea.
From San Francisco, where police check trucks on the Golden Gate Bridge, to Atlanta, where it's cars on airport roads, to Washington, where missiles again flank monuments, the familiar signs of elevated status are everywhere. And maybe, worry terror experts, familiarity is breeding complacency.
Terrorists, they originate from some point, whether it be another state, another city, another country. So it's important that everybody in the country keeps their focus and looks for any potential problems.
Des Moines is just as important as Manhattan.
Absolutely.
The deadline is at the end of the building, please.
Because a long delay at an airport should always be the worst thing that comes out of a raised terror alert. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
A strong earthquake shook coastal California today from San Francisco to Los Angeles. There is damage. There are deaths. The quake was centered midway between L.A. and the Bay Area. And as bad as it was, correspondent Jerry Bowen reports it could have been much worse.
The powerful quake hit California's sparsely populated central coast in late morning, killing at least 2 people in the collapse of a brick building in the wine country town of Paso Robles. This woman's sister was pulled from the rubble.
At one point thought that she wasn't going to make it out alive.
Power was knocked out to 10,000 homes and businesses by the sharp 6.5 timber that sent buildings swaying in San Francisco to the north and Los Angeles to the south, each nearly 200 miles away.
You put an earthquake like that under Los Angeles, and you have tens of billions of dollars of damage. You put it out here in a relatively remote place, and fortunately, there are not many immediate consequences.
The epicenter was located close to the coast near San Simeon and the landmark Hearst Castle. No injuries or major damage reported there, but the staff and visitors were evacuated as a precaution. The quake ruptured along a 20-mile previously unknown fault that parallels the infamous San Andreas Fault.
It's one of the, wonders of the world to feel solid rock behave like jello.
Scientists say the quake and its aftershocks are behaving, quote, like a garden variety quake, with more aftershocks likely in the hours and days ahead. Researchers say the odds are very small this shaker will trigger something larger or more dangerous. Instead, it seems the Christmas week quake of 2003 is one of those unwelcome wake-up calls for people living on the fault lines. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Overseas, a bomb exploded on a Baghdad street today as a U.S. military convoy was passing through. 2 soldiers from the Army's 1st Armored Division were killed. 2 others were wounded. U.S. commanders also announced the capture of a former general in Saddam Hussein's Internal Security Service. Thalia Shuris in Baghdad has our report.
Sweep by sweep, coalition forces claim they are making a major dent in the insurgency. This overnight raid in the northern town of Bakuba netted a once-feared Saddam security official suspected of directing anti-American attacks in the area.
Got a major general of Iraqi intelligence service suspected in coordinating Saddam Hussein activities in the area, financing and organizing a terrorist cell.
And in Baghdad's Adamiyah district, where owners of many of these mansions were among Saddam's most powerful deputies, another operation yielded nothing. But soldiers say house-to-house information gathering will lead to something next time.
The key is persistence, you just got to keep looking.
The military is trying to get a grip on the violence. In fact, iron grip is what they're calling the all-out press in the Iraqi capital, fueled by the intelligence bonanza brought by the capture of Saddam.
We got some great intel leads, much like a police department, but with a police department on steroids with all the intelligence we've had. So we've been going after those leads, continuing to run them down the rat hole.
But even as U.S. forces continue to go after the planners, they are coming under daily attack. The 2 soldiers killed today were the latest victims of what soldiers describe as the most dangerous weapon they face. Camouflage homemade bombs detonated as U.S. convoys pass by. But there's an iron will here to keep up the pressure on those with their fingers on the trigger and on their paymasters as well. Thalia Ashuris, CBS News, Baghdad.
In a sharply worded ruling today, a federal judge in Washington ordered the U.S. military to stop requiring servicemen and women to take what he called an experimental and potentially dangerous vaccine for anthrax. Barring a presidential waiver, the mandatory vaccinations will end. But as Wyatt Andrews report, the court's ruling comes too late for hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops.
The ruling accuses the Pentagon of using the armed forces as guinea pigs and calls the military's mandatory anthrax vaccination order illegal, citing evidence that the vaccine may not even work against inhaled anthrax on the battlefield, which was the point. The judge ruled that the vaccine is an investigational drug used for an unapproved purpose and ordered the Pentagon to stop giving the shots without consent.
The Pentagon treated its own members with disrespect to administer a vaccine to them that they know to be potentially unsafe or ineffective.
700,000 servicemen and women have already been forced to take anthrax vaccinations in a program that was troubled from the start. The vaccine caused blood clots in Army Captain Jason Natupsky and cost him his career.
If I knew then what I know now, I would have refused to take the vaccine.
The military has long argued it had to protect the armed forces against the chance of weaponized anthrax. The problem was many experts thought this particular vaccine was never worth the risk.
What this ruling is going to do is force the military to get a better vaccine, for sure, but to take seriously these reports of serious reactions.
The vaccinations had another human cost that can't be overstated. Because submission to the vaccine was in order, around 150 servicemen and women faced court-martial and served brig time for refusing an order a judge now says was illegal. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Washington.
In a report on pollution and global warming that will take many Americans by surprise, NASA scientists say that black soot that belches out of diesel exhaust plays a substantial role in climate change. When soot accumulates on regions of snow and ice, less sunlight is reflected back into space, thus warming the Earth's surface. Today's report says diesel soot may account for 1/4 of global warming seen in the past century. Coming up next on tonight's CBS Evening News, why did Libya's Muammar Gaddafi suddenly decide to come clean on his weapons of mass destruction programs? We'll have the inside story. And later, has the little blue pill so many men thought would change their lives really done that? We'll look into the truth about Viagra. On Wall Street today, the heightened concerns about a possible new terror attack had investors trading cautiously, but blue chip stocks still managed a respectable gain. The Dow picked up nearly 60 points, the Nasdaq about 5. American oil companies and the Libyan government could benefit from Libya's newly announced plan to give up trying to develop weapons of mass destruction. Libya said today it would welcome the return of U.S. companies prohibited from doing business there since 1986. But first, Muammar Gaddafi must prove he means what he says. CBS's Mark Phillips has the inside story.
Muammar Gaddafi may have declared his desire to give up his illicit weapons programs, but the mechanisms are now being put in place to hold his feet to the fire of verification. The International Atomic Energy Agency says it will kickstart, in its words, an inspection program beginning as soon as next week. The Libyans, in their newfound cooperative posture, have admitted to 10 biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons development sites U.S. intelligence has long had its eye on. But already the timing of Colonel Gaddafi's conversion is raising questions, as is his reward of instant rehabilitation. The orchestrated announcements of the deal in Britain and Washington portrayed Gaddafi's change of heart as the result of President Bush's get them before they get you doctrine.
It's because of the attacks on Afghanistan and Iraq that Gaddafi has, in my view, decided that he has to come clean.
Yet the initial Libyan overtures, in fact, came before the Iraq War began. They followed the admission by Libya that it was behind the 1988 bombing of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, and they seem to have been motivated as well by a desire for more Western investment in and more revenue from the country's oil industry.
We have made a deal with the devil, but we have done so because it serves our political and strategic interests.
Libya's conversion from dangerous international pariah to partner in disarmament, its hope may do more than simply remove one country from the threat list. Access to intelligence may provide information on the illicit weapons trade and perhaps indicate who else has them. Mark Phillips, CBS News, London.
Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, this man says he'll get to the bottom of the 9/11 terror attacks. How he plans to do it in a moment.
And how it affects your money. The latest in the war on terror, health issues at home and abroad. When you need to know, you need the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
People who lost loved ones in the 9/11 attacks have until midnight tonight to file claims with the Victim Compensation Fund. So far, 92% of eligible families have done so, giving up the right to sue the airlines. Meanwhile, CBS's Randall Pinkston reports the head of the independent commission investigating the attacks is vowing to get answers, no matter what it takes.
A report should be the authoritative source.
When he was governor of New Jersey, Tom Kean had a reputation for avoiding confrontation.
In the 2 years since 9/11.
But as chairman of the 9/11 Commission, he's taking no prisoners.
But it doesn't make us popular. And I don't care if it doesn't make us popular, frankly.
In a wide-ranging interview on the Commission's work, Cain made no apologies for using the threat of subpoenas to force government agencies, including the White House, to produce sensitive documents.
We're saying we don't care what the precedents are. Let us see that. We don't care nobody else has seen that. We have to see it. Our mission is unique. Our mission is different.
As we first reported, Cain believes 9/11 could have been avoided.
We're looking for, how could this have been prevented? I mean, this was not something that had to happen.
He says the Commission's report will get to the bottom of what went wrong, including the failure of America's military defense to stop the hijacked planes on September 11th.
What we found is our whole defense apparatus was still fighting the Cold War. Our defenders in the Air Force were focused out to sea. Nobody was focused on an internal threat.
Cain hopes to complete the final report in time to prompt the presidential candidates to embrace its recommendations.
My dream is that we make meaningful recommendations, and those recommendations become in a large part of those two-party platforms. Because if they do, then we'll really be able to get some action.
The Commission faces a May 27th deadline, but with hundreds of interviews still undone and thousands of pages of documents to review, Cain won't rule out asking for an extension. Still, whenever the report is completed, Cain insists it will be done with integrity. Randall Pinkston, CBS News, New York.
With prescription drugs so expensive, the governor of Illinois today asked the federal government for permission to import cheaper drugs from Canada to help the state save money on health insurance. But Illinois is unlikely to get an okay. Health and Human Services Secretary Tommy Thompson maintains the safety of imported drugs can't be guaranteed. Governor Rod Blagojevich says he might take the issue to court. It may be the best-known drug since aspirin, but does Viagra really do everything men thought it would? The truth about Viagra when the CBS Evening News continues. We hope you'll be watching the CBS Evening News all this holiday week. We'll look at the pain of separation as families of U.S. servicemen and women far from home struggle to get by without their loved ones. Then you'll meet a Santa Claus you'd expect would be receiving gifts instead of giving them. And we'll show you where some of the money you donate to charities may be going. It's an eye-opening consumer alert later this week. We close tonight with what's being called the Viagra myth. When the so-called love drug went on the market almost 6 years ago, it was a source of hope for millions of men. But many who suffer from impotence have found the drug is not a cure-all. CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon went in search for the truth about Viagra.
By now, the little blue pill has become part of our culture.
What about Viagra?
Go Viagra. One of the most recognizable drugs ever developed. To date, more than 1 billion tablets have been sold.
Hey, Joe, you been working out?
No.
And along the way, it's developed something of a wonder drug status. A reputation it can solve all sexual problems. Ed Buckner jumped at the chance to try it.
And you said?
I said, sure.
When his doctor suggested it might help a dwindling sex drive.
It's talked about, it's in movies, it's made jokes of. And I think that the general consensus is, yeah, if you have a problem, you can pop a pill.
That concerns doctors like Abe Morgenthaler.
All Viagra does is increase blood flow. It doesn't do anything to the brain.
Or the heart, according to Dr. Morgenthaler, who's written a book called The Viagra Myth.
Viagra can't create love, can't create intimacy, can't create desire.
Morgenthaler is particularly troubled by a growing population of younger men getting Viagra off the internet for social, not medical reasons.
This is now a lifestyle medication.
Viagra's manufacturer, Pfizer, says the vast majority of men know what Viagra can and cannot do, and they use it wisely. But Janice Lipsky agrees the drug has become larger than life.
It's become an icon.
It's contributed to a male sexual revolution, she says, removing the stigma of impotence. That, in turn, has helped many relationships, like this one, written about in a letter sent to the company.
It has made a marked change for the better in our lives.
But because expectations are so high, Viagra has also disappointed many. According to industry reports, fewer than 50% of men who try it go back for more.
Go get it.
In the end, it didn't work for Ed Buckner. He was suffering from a hormonal problem that was treated with other drugs, and he disliked the lack of spontaneity.
From the very beginning, it just never really did what I hoped it would do for me.
Buckner admits through anecdotes and ads, men are somehow led to believe Viagra can cure any sexual problem. It may be the answer for millions, but for others it will remain a pill whose reputation is more potent than its effect. Elizabeth Caledon, CBS News, New York.
Tomorrow we'll have the other side of the story. We'll visit a town where residents insist Viagra does everything anyone could hope for and more. And that's the CBS Evening News for this Monday. For Dan Rather, I'm John Roberts in New York. Thanks for choosing CBS News. Have a good night.
For news 24 hours a day, click on CBSNews.com. Brought to you in part by Walmart. Saving you and your family time and money with everyday low prices. Why is this little port town called the capital of love? Details tomorrow. Experience CBS News.